Welcome back, everybody, to the Dave Knows Wrestling live stream. I'm your host, David Lee. Let the universe howl in despair, for I have returned. But not only did I return, but also my man, the one, the only, the finest commentator in all the land, Stephen James. How you doing, Stephen?
Oh boy, it's great to be back in the Know It All Nation. It's been such a long time. Very excited to see if I can anger people more than Albert, or do I still have the chops? The IWC will come see me. That's for sure.
All right, yes. So we're going to be talking about a lot of things. We will also be following this up. Now, this live stream we're doing right now for all of you, but we will be following this up with some Patreon exclusive footage, a little bit of behind the scenes stuff at Catalyst Wrestling. Also, we're going to be talking a little more about the IWC as well as other things that you'll just have to wait and see about. So we'll be saving that. So that's going to be a special feature just for the Patreons. So if you're interested in catching that up with Stephen James, check out my Patreon page and sign up, because that's a great way to do it. But we are going to be talking about a few things for all of you here. So first and foremost, welcome back, Steve. So good to have you.
Yeah, it's good to be back. It's been a long time. Obviously, those of you who follow me know we've been burning the candle at both ends and the middle. Between Catalyst Wrestling, between my day gig. Just got back from LA for the first time. That was a lot of fun. Although I don't get how is jaywalking a thing in LA? Like, if you live in LA and you get caught for jaywalking, how bad do you feel? That shouldn't be a thing, but it is. So
Did you get caught for jaywalking? Is that
no, but I had to be told, hey, stop and wait for the light. And I look around, there's no cars. I'm like, I should just be walking now. There's nothing here. But apparently you can't.
Trying to break down the New York stereotype of I'm walking here, right?
Look, it's called the stereotype of New York for a reason, because most of it is true.
Fair enough.
I am living proof.
Fair enough. Okay, so let's take a quick time out to say hello to some of the wonderful people in the chat, like Vinny Montagna and also Aiden Thomas. Vinny says, "What's up, fellas? Good afternoon to True Sinister. Good to see you again." Dale Santaford, hello to the Chicago World Order. So it's a bit of a surprise because we came on and I was already on earlier, but figured, why not have both? Okay, so anyway, first things we got to talk about. I'm going to get this out the way. I've been talking about it a lot ad nauseum. I'm personally sick and tired of it. But let's get a little bit of what you think, Mr. Stephen James. Let's get that out there to all those in the know. Let's talk about it. The CM Punk Young Bucks Omega backstage controversy. Let me hear what you have to say about it.
There's too much to really talk about here. Well, I'll talk a little bit about it. I'm sure, the Patreon stuff will be a little bit more in depth when we can kind of fully sink our teeth into it. I'm excited for the independent investigation. I'm glad that that they're going in that route. I wish that there was more transparency involving that. But since they're not a publicly traded company, they can kind of just not tell you anything, and it'll be fine. I want to know if that bite mark, we saw that photo recently, Omega doing something, there's a bite mark, if that's from Ace Steel. I mean, I want to know, because it looks like he uses Invisalign. Looks very good. Yeah, maybe he does. Who knows? Yeah. But between, dropping cuss words and then that, after that, I don't know. I'll save my full thoughts on what should happen to all of them for a little bit later. But it's a mess. I'm glad the honeymoon phase is over for AEW fans for the most part, where they're starting to see that, look, it's still it might not be a good idea to have your talent in very key high positions and, be a little bit like, I'm just playing with my toys. No, these are people. It's their business. Obviously tempers are going to be high. There's somebody who's been gone for so long. There's a lot to unpack with that.
Okay, now I'm glad you brought up the difference between a publicly traded company like WWE and what AEW is. Because I do think there's a lot of times that people don't necessarily understand or take into consideration how much of a difference that really makes.
Sure.
But one of the differences that I think it leads into, and I'm curious to know your take on this, is because they're not a publicly traded company, there are, of course, people out there who think that this might just be a work.
Look, I everything is a work if you phrase it correctly. I'm sure at some point, if all parties can get on the same page, they will turn it into a work if they're all smart businessmen about it. That's the way that it probably should go. I don't think that it started as a work, but smart businessmen turn those kind of shoots into a work. I don't think that this is long-term booking. Look, he winked at the camera in 1999 and wore a bite mark tattoo on his sleeve. The AEW fans are a little bit ridiculous with that, where they're like, this person's shoe was untied and he tripped, and then it's just relax.
Well,
don't hear the X-Files theme just yet.
If you go back to Kenny Omega and his last Wrestle Kingdom match and look at the 2 minute and 38-second mark, you'll clearly see, the whole AEW thing.
I don't think it's a work, but I do think if they're smart enough and can resolve it like adults and like businessmen, it would behoove them to turn it into a work, because again, they're not a publicly traded company, so they don't have to disclose a lot of that stuff, and no one will be the wiser.
Okay, now, I am curious to know more about who you think what direction the company should take, who should get what kind of parameters, but as you said, we'll be saving that for the Patreon, so we'll be hanging on to that one later. Sure. However, there is another controversy going on in the world of wrestling that I think a lot of us are going to want to hear about. A specific figure, in fact. So give us your rundown on what to do with a certain individual. I recently did a video on what do you think should happen when it comes to the booking world of wrestling and Velveteen Dream.
Oh, if I'm one of the major companies, he's radioactive. I don't touch him with a 10-foot pole. It's proven time and time again that there's either, again, I don't know this person personally. I can only speak for based on what I see, based on the reports, and based on people that I know who have interacted with him and dealt with him, who have talked to me. There's a certain lack of maturity in that person that leads to these types of situations. Obviously, EC3 coming out with he was trying to film everybody peeing and like all this other stuff, and this is coming off right after him getting arrested. And I know the issues with the interaction with potential minor; those were kind of proven to be. I never really got full clarity on that.
That's my point. That's exactly my point. Because, I mean, who's right, who's wrong, who knows? But Velveteen Dream has a completely different rendition of it, and he has someone else who says they can confirm that what EC3 said was incorrect. Whether that's true or not is a different story, but that's what he claimed. And also, let's remember, speaking of internal investigations, it applies to more than just AEW, because Triple H and WWE did internal investigation on Velveteen Dream, and they found nothing. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, does that mean something? And before anybody responds by saying, well, of course they found nothing, he's a WWE employee, well, let's just point out that the internal investigation on Vince McMahon himself found something. It's the reason why Vince isn't in charge right now.
It's not the same as it used to be even 10, 15 years ago. It doesn't behoove them to cover up something with a guy who's a potential future star, not really a current star. And I'm sorry, being at the top of NXT doesn't make you a star. It makes you a star in waiting, perhaps. It is a developmental brand to me. It is not a third brand. If you are at the top of the mountain there, you can parlay it into other things like being signed to AEW, like being brought up to the main roster. But you're basically the best of the indies.
All right, but I do have a question, though, about continuing with this, though.
Sure.
As I talked about in my video, the concept of innocent to proven guilty, where do you stand on that? Is that something you still believe in, or is that something you think doesn't really apply?
I absolutely believe that you're innocent until proven guilty. The court of public opinion doesn't agree with that, and ultimately a business has to decide. Look, there's no criminal charges coming out. That applies to criminal charges. A business can do whatever they want with their own morality clauses within the context of the law. Is it right? Did it fall under wrongful termination? No, they can decide that this person is not good for our brand, even the optics of it. We've seen it a million times. Somebody who's, even with the Enzo Amore thing, which, they ultimately landed on the side of, well, this wasn't exactly true. They didn't exactly handle it, or what was said wasn't factual. Didn't matter. That was an opportunity they used to get rid of somebody who was toxic for their brand at the time. So I think businesses have the right to decide the allegations of this person, the juice isn't worth the squeeze. Now, if there were criminal charges brought for him where there are actual tangible consequences for it, you have to operate under the rules of innocent until proven guilty. That's the law of the land. That's how it should be. But if you're a business, you do it that way. And then he didn't sue. He didn't countersue for wrongful termination because he wouldn't have had a case.
Fair enough. Okay, now, we will be talking furthermore about the differences of, wrestling as a business versus wrestling as an art form, as you will. We're going to be talking more about that over on the Patreons. But speaking of which, let's take your time out to say hello to some of the wonderful Patreons here of the Know It All Nation. Inigo Montoya, so good to see you. I'm glad that you are here. Inigo wants to respond by saying, jaywalking in LA, it's like a pastime for their cops. They just love stopping people for that. Oh, so, keep the skills sharp. I guess it's like training day, right? Base Up, thank you for the support over on Patreon, says, who is that guy? He looks like someone who used to be in Livestream back in your studio. Yeah, who's that guy?
Never heard of her.
I will point out that, me and Steve did a lot of great work at that studio last year. Definitely missed it. But, let's just move on instead of focusing on that. Oh, and Vinny Montani wants to say you look cool in the shades. Look good with the shades.
I love you, Vin. Looking forward to seeing you tomorrow on my stream.
All right, so don't worry. We're really moving off of that. We're not talking about too much of this stuff for the Scrum. I know, Inigo, you're not a big fan of it. Don't worry. And also, speaking of Patreon supporters, thank you so much to Ron Hawthorne, as well as everybody else for being here. Ron, welcome. Good to see you. And also is welcoming you back, too. Okay, so moving back, talking about some of the other things that we're discussing, talking about controversial figures, backstage investigations. I did just mention the backstage investigation on Vince McMahon himself. So, as a big fan of WWE and a big understander of how business works, how wrestling works as a business, as a company, and it's been a while. What do you have to say about the Vince McMahon situation? Furthermore, how do you feel about the transition to Triple H? How do you think that's gone down? And anything you have to say about the whole thing.
From a business perspective and from a moral perspective, like obviously I don't know what the investigation found. If there are consensual relationships, that's an ethical thing that each one of us have to decide. Well, this person took the money, they did that. There's power dynamics involved, so there's obviously a layer of this person took advantage. The money thing is, if you're strictly talking business, is inexcusable. Even though it is his business, you are putting your business in a vulnerable place where now money is missing. It's no longer just you at the top anymore. Sure, you are at the top, but it's not just you. You have shareholders to be accountable for. You have board members, you name it. So watching all that money disappear and having it be under those sorts of circumstances on top of that, if he was just stealing money and it didn't have that other connotation there, I don't think that he would have been released. I think that he could have weathered that. I don't think he would have been, kind of forced to ride off into the sunset. I think he could have just ate that one.
Well, technically speaking, he wasn't released. He did retire.
Sure.
Technically, they was of his own volition.
Yeah, and they wished him best in all of his future endeavors. I get it. As far as the transition, I think WWE has not gotten enough credit for the way that they handled the transition. Because if you thought about it 10, 15 years ago, even though people were clamoring for Vince to step down and start the next thing, most people thought it would be a disaster in the interim. One guy doing all these things, how are they going to function? What's it going to be like? Oh my God, this, that, and the other. They seamlessly went. It shows that Vince was just the head of the machine, but the cogs kept going. They just planted somebody else in there. Triple H kind of slid into the, which I think was smart, the figurehead position of it to make him the lightning rod, so to speak. It gets it away from the name McMahon completely, which most people enjoy, and allows a fresh name to be responsible for everything, whether it's actually true or not. in the eyes of the people and in the eyes of the media, he's the guy who's the most forward. So that's the person doing the interviews. That's the person being covered. That's the person whose decisions, even though they're not just his, now he's become the new Vince because they need one person to kind of be seen as a clarion voice. I think they've done a great job.
I do agree with a lot of what you have to say there, because especially I've said this, I've repeated this multiple times. Because WWE themselves have said they've set themselves up as a company to be that no one is bigger than the WWE itself. It's better and bigger than the sum of its parts. You know, not Hulk Hogan, not Steve Austin, not The Rock, not John Cena, not CM Punk. Nobody is bigger. Not even.
Don't you group him in with those guys?
That was part of the promo that they cut to CM Punk.
Ugh.
I didn't. That's what was said.
Fair.
I was doing the promo.
Fair enough. I just gotta separate that. That's a clear.
I'm just saying that was the promo. But and also Vince McMahon himself. The idea is that no one is bigger than the company, even Vince. And I'm agreeing with you. I didn't think that was actually true. And then, but they've proven it that the WWE machine keeps going, and even without Vince, and their stock rose. Like, it took an initial hit, of course, when the controversy came out, but afterwards, after he retired, it went up, and I was really surprised because stock has a lot to do with how much people believe in the company, and when you lose the guy, I mean, yeah, it was Capital Wrestling before that, and all those other things, the Capital Wrestling Corporation and Worldwide Wrestling Federation, but WWE, WWF, as we know it, for realsies, is a Vince creation. Vince and Kenny McMahon Jr. creation. That we know. And it's like Marvel without Stan Lee. And Marvel wound up succeeding and doing well without Stan Lee. So you never know. Like, sometimes companies handle it well, but then there are other times where how many other companies have gone bankrupt or out of business because the son or daughter took over the company and then it just fizzled out. I mean,
this ain't Dixie Carter and this ain't TNA. There's wrestling people behind it as well as business people. The reason why the stock recovered so quickly is the initial fear people, the initial people who don't really understand what's going on, they bolted. They're like, Vince is gone. But those who have followed the company for a while and saw some of the moves that were being made, and mind you, with immediacy, no hesitation, no dirt sheet rumors, no leaving it to the IWC to yak about who's going to be. They're going to bring back Vince Russo, brother. No, they just immediately said, this is what it is. This is who's going to be there, and just moved on. They had that thank you, Vince, whatever, which a lot of people thought was weird, but I think that was the best way that they could have handled it. Just thank you, move on. Because then the conversation is, well, how do you handle Vince? Do you mention him? They handled him. They said it, and now move on. Now nobody's saying, well, hey, what about Vince? Nobody cares. I mean, maybe for the Hall of Fame, but that's it.
I do think we will see him on WWF TV again eventually, someday. Sure. Like, I think it's going to happen.
As they should.
Right. So we're going to continue more about this over on the Patreons. But before we do, I do want to get to some of your comments, especially give you guys a chance to talk to Steve. We haven't done that in a while. And also to say hello to yet another awesome and wonderful Patreon, Mangy Stray. So good to see you. Thank you so much for the support. But yeah, we do have a couple of people saying a few things. True Sister does agree with you that Enzo was a bit toxic backstage. But Ron Hawthorne has this to say, and I think this is very important. He says, people with bad attitudes and others accused of worse than Dream still have wrestling careers. So I think he's got a point there. So what would be the differentiator? What would be why Velveteen Dream perhaps is in one section while other people with worse past are there too?
It's not ethically right, but Velveteen Dream never drew a dime. These other people have drawn several dimes. Stone Cold Steve Austin, his non-allegations, his actual things that he did, doesn't matter because if from a business perspective, not a moral one, you got to be able to separate the two sometimes. There's no way you're going, Stone Cold, get out of here. I'm going to leave all of this money on the table. That's the difference. Morally, it's not right. It's not exactly fair. But when has business been fair? Yeah.
You know, it'd be interesting because WCW would have bought him in a second. Would have picked him in a heartbeat.
Like that.
And cancel culture didn't exist back then, so You know,
He would have been the Dream on Thunder, whatever.
Okay, so furthermore, let's also get to a few more comments. Let's just see. So a lot of people talking about, like Base Up, for example, is saying Vince accomplished his ultimate dream. He made WWE bigger than everyone, even himself. So I know we just touched upon this, but I will say, what I do agree with you on is that Hunter is a figurehead, and they moved it away from. But so you think that's because of the McMahon name, because Stephanie has the last name? But if that's the case, I know we've talked about this before, but why do you think they put Stephanie in charge in the first place then, if that was the case? Why not just give it to Hunter?
Oh, do you mean before? Well, because they had to let people know, hey, as far as business goes, there's still a McMahon here to kind of stop that bleeding of the stock, because the McMahon name still holds the most weight out of any name in professional wrestling. I'm sorry, the Khan name isn't even close. Take your IWC cry towel and go somewhere else with it. I'm sorry. So once they solidified, okay, well, there's a McMahon behind the business aspect of it. Triple H is now the figurehead on screen, and he's in charge of creative. Oh, well, he's had a pretty good run, a proven track record in NXT of having success there. He's been in the business a very long time, and he's connected to being under the Vince learning tree for business as well. So it's the best of all worlds. You put Stephanie out front, move her right away, and then slide Triple H in, and really we haven't seen Stephanie since.
Right, yeah. Now, we're going to be wrapping things up real quick, so if you have anything to ask Steve and James in the comment section, please, in the chat, go ahead and ask while you still can. In the interim, while people get some of their questions out there, I do want to bring up a few, just one more comment that I saw here that I thought was very important. Chef talks about how another example of business not being fair would be, well, Jerry the King Lawler. Because let's not pry into too much of the personal life or what is necessarily going on, but there are certain things that some people have been accused of lately that you gotta admit, Jerry has had some issues with himself.
Sure.
So is there any other promoter you could think of in a similar situation that you gotta admit somehow alleviated the Vince McMahon process or punishment?
Now, again, the reason why Jerry the King Lawler escaped sort of that punishment is he has drawn several dimes. It's a business, folks. I don't care if you like the art form. I really don't give a damn. Neither do they. I love the art form. But you know what I understand that it is? It's a business. If Dave, for example, starts training, right, and he goes, and now he's signed to NXT, right, and then he gets in trouble. He accidentally nudges a cop, and he falls over, and he breaks his foot. There could be a guy on Raw main eventing WrestleMania who did something even worse. He could beat kittens with a baseball bat and a laundry bag. He'll still stay.
Right. And
Dave will be fired.
Right.
Because it's a business.
Okay, so let's get to a couple of these comments before we get out of here.
Oh, if I may for just a moment. Two things. If you guys would be so kind to follow my Twitch channel, twitch.tv/HMR Radio Live. I'd appreciate that. And also Catalyst Wrestling on YouTube if you want to see some of the new stuff that we've been doing, including our boy Dave. Yeah, that's a little too sweet. Yeah, that's Dave.
Very good. Yes, please check out Catalyst Wrestling, and of course, follow Mr. Steven James over on the Twitch. Okay, so let's get to a couple more questions that some of you guys have for Mr. Steven James. The Law says,
oh, no.
This brings me flashbacks from 2019. Glad to see you guys chatting up. Well, welcome back, The Law. Wonder who that might be.
I would fight The Law, but I feel like The Law might have an advantage.
Yep, I would say that is a common thing. The Law. Yeah. Anyway, Ryan Key says Lawler is also. Well, yeah, Ryan. And that was exactly your point about how much money Mr. Lawler drew.
Sure, the Marty Jannetty versus HBK argument that I see over there. It's like if Marty Jannetty.
No. See,
drew
Shawn
money.
Michaels doesn't draw money.
Oh, whatever.
Marty Jannetty is the better one. I don't know how many times I got to explain this to people.
Me, in the pit zone fight club. That extreme
Yeah.
It's just the same.
Hey, all I gotta say, when was the only time that WWF was ever number 2? It was under a certain reign by Mr. Shawn Michaels. So I'm just saying.
Bro, Mantar.
It was Mantar's fault. It was
Mantar.
All right, guys, we're going to get out of here. But remember, we are going to be doing more content, and that's going to be Patreon exclusive. So if you'd like to hear more about what me and Mr. Stephen James are going to be discussing, we're going to be going more in depth into the CM Punk backstage fiasco, as also, our thoughts on CM Punk as, in general. Furthermore, we're also going to be talking about some behind-the-scenes stories of Catalyst Wrestling, and we're also going to be looking more at, well, the real opinions on the IWC. Oh, and also shout out to Darius Carter for cracking over to the top 150 of the PWI. So shout out to Mr.
I think
Carter.
Personally that's low.
Yeah. He is wrestling's richest prize and the champion of Catalyst Wrestling.
Love to see it. Thanks to the Know It All Nation for welcoming me back here. You guys have been great supporters of not only, Dave Knows Wrestling, but of Catalyst Wrestling. We see you guys out there watching every week. I hope to make more special appearances here. Life and work have been super, super busy, but you guys have not been far from my mind. Your usual jabs at Albert are always great. I love that. You guys love me.
That's true. Yeah, I was going to say, maybe you did lose your touch because you haven't made anybody mad today.
Not yet. Not yet. But there's time on Patreon.
There's time on Patreon. Well, I don't think I don't think you're as aggravating as you think you are. I think Albert's more so than you.
I think it's because he's like an Islander fan or something, or a Jet fan. I think it is something about that losery Jet fanness that they can't do anything. Ugh.
Okay, so one more time, tell everybody where they can find you.
Twitch.tv/HMR Radio Live. It's where I have my 2-hour radio show every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday from 9 p.m. to 11 p.m. We also do video game streams over there as well as Catalyst Wrestling on YouTube. We recently had the pleasure of having a independent wrestling legend join our staff to become the official matchmaker of Catalyst Wrestling, and you're going to have to stay tuned to find out who that is, and I guarantee you, to quote Cody Rhodes, there's more than one. That's all I'll say. I'm going to leave the rest.
Excellent. All right. Thank you again, and thank all of you and all of my Patreon supporters. Thank you for help, and hope you're looking forward to seeing more of this discussion with Mr. Stephen James.
Patreon.
Patreon. Thank you so much, and as always, Dave knows.
That's him.